Moving along, we actually have Dr. Colleen Fogarty Draper. She is representing Natural Remedies, who's underwriting this session. She's a scientist, entrepreneur, clinical dietitian, specializing in nutrition systems biology. She has her own consulting business, NutriU Health, driving scientific R&D. She has a PhD in life sciences with the Center for Analytical Biosciences, Leiden Academic Center for Drug Research, and that's in the Netherlands, and a Master's of Science degree from Tufts University. So please join me in a presentation talking about decoding cognitive longevity, adding life to years. Dr. Fogarty Draper, welcome to the stage.
Thank you for that introduction, and welcome everybody. I'm actually really curious where you are all listening in from. If you have a chance to just type in where you're located, it would be great to see in the messages. Although I'm not sure how I can see the messages right now, so forgive me. But needless to say, I'm so happy to join you today. I am American, and I am talking to you from Switzerland, where we are having quite the heat wave. And so I have some fans behind me, and they're not people, but actual fans. So let's talk about cognitive longevity. And I want to give special thanks to Mind and Natural Remedies, who are sponsoring this presentation today. So the first thing is to understand, what is cognition? So cognition is focused on your memory, your capacity to learn, your ability to pay attention. It's it's the ability to remember where your car keys are and where you also parked your car. And it's actually a function that we've now learned that we can protect throughout our life cycle. So as opposed to when I was working as a clinician 3 decades ago, and we worried about the cognition of our elderly patients, we now know that our cognition starts changing, starts declining in our early 30s, that our neurons actually decrease and our brains actually shrink. But the good news is there are things that we can do about this. And the first is to understand what this is. Our brain contains 86 billion neurons, and they're all talking to each other. They're making trillions of connections, and they're protected by 86 billion glial cells. So if we think about our brain span, we actually experience several windows of vulnerability along our life cycle. From the early days, we're in a very high learning time, and our brain is making lots of neural synapses. And this is a time when we might identify issues with learning and neurodiversity, more often with boys when they're younger. For girls, they're later. Girls tend to mask it more. Boys tend to show more behavioral issues. Then we go into our adolescent years, dealing with stress, pressure of doing well in school, social pressures, and also changes in mood related to hormone changes, right? We go into adulthood, we're concerned about cognitive performance, performing well at work. Can we focus enough and attend enough to our work to do well enough to make the money we need to support ourselves and perhaps our families? In midlife, now we're looking at more hormone changes, particularly for the women that go through that extreme phenotypic event called menopause. And for me, and if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, you will see I have a lot of posts around menopause and female hormone health. But definitely around this idea that menopause is this extreme phenotypic change where women really will experience very noticeable differences in cognition that seem to come overnight. And then into our aging years, where we're really concerned about those normal natural changes we consider in aging, where there are episodic changes in memory and motivation. And the good news is that there are ways that we can manage this throughout our life cycle, that we don't have to wait till we're older in order to address these issues, and that we have this opportunity to build something called a cognitive reserve. So I'll talk about that in a few minutes. However, I do want to point out that cognitive decline is a growing concern. So why is this? Well, we've got an increase in the size of our aging population, where we're going to see more cognitive challenges naturally, but we are also regularly challenging our cognition, our brain capacity, not only with stress and our maxing out our stress thresholds, but also with our excessive screen time. So the average screen time, the time that we use digital devices in a day is over 7 hours. And I mean, personally, I am 100% guilty of that. Many of us are. Here we are working in scientific wellness, but we are certainly spending a lot of time on our screens to do so, right? And then our attention span has decreased. So that's been one of the outcomes. Our attention span has actually decreased from 18 seconds to 8 seconds, which is less than that of a goldfish. So why can this be happening from a digital point of view? And there are really pros and cons of this, but from a digital point of view, we have unknowingly, I think, in some ways, abused our access to digital technology, right? Because if we're using a lot of social media, we're doing a lot of things that require very short attention span. Then we can worsen our focus issues. If we're using our phones at night right before bed and not practicing good sleep hygiene, now we're disrupting our circadian rhythms. If we're not going out, we're staying home to game or do things on the computer to socialize behind the scenes, then maybe we're a little bit isolated in terms of real human contact, which I think will be becoming an increasing issue as our AI technology becomes more and more ubiquitous. And then one area I know I am extraordinarily guilty of is memory dependency. For example, I don't go anywhere without my Google Maps. And I think there are times when I have really let go of that capacity to reason out where I'm going and really use my mind. Now, the good news is that we can look at this differently, and there are plenty of opportunities where we've already, as a society, built technology to help us with memory and focus and that kind of thing. But this has been really quite a problem for us societally. And with that increase in information and pressure to perform, I think this is where, and the increased aging population, we're seeing a lot of focus in this area of cognition. So just a reminder, a quick overview of how the brain works. We have various lobes or domains in our brains that have different requirements of them, right? They're like different focus groups, and then they all have to work together. For example, our frontal lobe is responsible for executive function. Our temporal lobes then help us with encoding new memories. Our hippocampus, which is deep inside the center of the brain, that's where we store our long-term memory. Okay, so that's a very important aspect of our cognition. Now, all of these lobes or domains of the brain have to work together through communicating. And this is where we focus on our neurotransmitters as vital messengers. For example, acetylcholine is one of our neurotransmitters that is the star when it comes to mental clarity, processing new information, and cementing memory. And then acetylcholine works with dopamine, which helps get us motivated to learn more. It helps us, it works with serotonin, which keeps us calm, resisting distractions so we can focus and learn. And of course, norepinephrine, which is really helping us with staying alert. All of these amino acids are then protected by BDNF. So what is BDNF? BDNF is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And BDNF actually protects the neurotransmitters, and it actually helps increase neurogenesis, so actually making new neurons, which is very, very nice because I mentioned already as we age, our neurons decrease, which is maybe not so nice. But there is one thing that can help you increase your BDNF, that you know that if you're doing it, you will increase that BDNF, which is going to support your neurotransmitters. It's going to support your brain and your cognition. And do you know what it is? So a little hard to show on the video, but if I was in front of you live, I would be doing 10 squats with you right now because it's building muscle that actually sends signals to the brain to make BDNF to make you smarter. So we'll talk about that a little more in a few minutes. The other point to make here, actually, I'm like rushing ahead of myself with the slides, is that nutrient precursors play a key role in supporting our neurotransmitters. Of what are they? Choline, which you get from eggs, and soy, for example, supports acetylcholine. Amino acids like tyrosine and tryptophan support our dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. So amino acids from proteins, so really emphasizes the importance of good quality protein. And then, of course, our B vitamins are precursors in our actual neurotransmitter metabolism. So things to think about. There is lots of published peer-reviewed literature showing all the things that we can do to reduce our cognitive longevity. That includes poor diet, not enough exercise, chronic stress that's poorly managed, poor sleep, and even living in places that are high in pollution. I really thought this study was interesting because what they did was they evaluated medical residents, surgery residents, before and after their 26-hour shifts. And what they found was that, of course, they had increased inflammation. They also found they had greater impulsivity, slower cognitive processing, impaired executive function. So we are putting the very people that we need to take care of us through so much stress that we actually decrease their cognition. So not only are we showing them how not to take care of themselves, but then we're relying on them, ironically, to take care of us. So let's think about stress for a minute. We were all created, our physical bodies were created with the ability to run from that saber-toothed tiger. Fortunately, many of us don't have to do that anymore, but we still act like we are. And so what happens is the body learns how to shut down digestion and impair glucose control and actually increase blood pressure and do all the things it needs to, as if you're running from a saber-toothed tiger. The result is, of course, a series of metabolic chronic diseases. But one thing that stress also does is, and I'm sorry if this sounds harsh, but it actually shrinks the brain. And so what we want to look at when we're looking at ways to manage our stress, we can evaluate our cortisol, but we also can personally evaluate ourselves. So if you look at this diagram, what you will see in the center is where we are achieving optimum stress and still being able to experience joy, where we still make dopamine. So for example, presenting to you right now, I can confirm for you, yes, I have some stress, but it's positive stress. I'm also making dopamine because actually I really enjoy it. So we've got this optimum stress point in that curve is where we want to reach. And where we get in trouble is when we start going too far on the right side. And that is really where we start getting into trouble because our cortisol is too high all of the time. Eventually, we can reach a burnout moment where we don't make enough cortisol, can't get out of bed. But this chronic stress will lead us to a serious decrease in attention and working memory and mind wandering. So we see that this chronic stress and poor stress management actually affects our cognitive longevity. And so if you think about if you're in a high stress scientific field and your career is really important to you and you want to, keep yourself going as long as you can, maybe you don't really want to retire and you want to keep working. But if you don't manage your stress well, you won't be able to. So let's talk a little bit about normal aging versus decline and what the difference is. Because in the case of normal aging, and if you've got elderly people in your life, you will recognize this. For example, they might take a little bit longer to remember a name. Sometimes it's even yours. They might be a little slower at multitasking, or they forget the words for things, but it comes back, right? So that's normal aging. And the good news is there are things that we can do to protect our normal aging. On the other hand, when we talk about cognitive decline, this is when the memory goes and doesn't come back, and it's hard to multitask, and you see personality changes. So menopause starts in the brain. What if we called it brainopause? Menopause actually, we've historically, in an ancient kind of way, thought of as having hot flashes. I thought that I was just going to become angry and have hot flashes when I went into my menopause. I had no idea actually my hormones and my physiology had in store for me, and like many women, was quite in some denial for it. But there's some really interesting research that has happened, for example, in the case of Lisa Mosconi, who talks about menopause as a brain disorder. That is really one of the telltale signs, is how the brain changes. And so she's done neuroimaging studies, and she actually shows us that this brain fog, which is forgetfulness, and it's losing trains of thought, it's forgetting what you're saying actually halfway through a sentence, sometimes difficulties with multitasking that maybe she never had before. But all of that is actually related to brain structure, connectivity, and energy metabolism. So in her research, she's shown that the use of brain energy decreases by 30% before and after menopause. And what is the primary source of energy for the brain? Drum roll, it is glucose. So let's talk a little more about that, shall we? Because more and more we are talking about Alzheimer's as brain diabetes, because you have twice the risk of Alzheimer's if you do have diabetes. You also have twice the risk of Alzheimer's if you are female, okay? And if you have had decades of damage to your brain from poor glucose control, that increases your risk significantly of developing Alzheimer's. So what we know about Alzheimer's now, where women are twice as likely to develop it than men, is that it starts in our early 30s. Amazing, isn't it? You might feel fine now, but if you're having sugar spikes and insulin surges, that actually causes a brain glucose drop, and it can be damaging to your brain function. And of course, there are things that we can do to help manage our glucose control. Simple things like walking for 10 minutes after meals, or doing your 10 squats, protecting your sleep, protein and fiber before carbs. And of course, strength training helps with glucose control as well as cognitive function. I already talked about this, but I was amazed when I was really first digging into this field how many peer-reviewed publications there are that support our brain function. So there's plenty. Lower body strength, if you compare twins, one with more lower body strength than the other, the one with more lower body strength will have higher cognitive capacity. The best exercise for cognition is dancing. Voila. I mentioned cognitive reserve at the beginning of my talk. It is an investment. It is an investment over time. Think about investing in your cognition the way you invest in money. Start in your 20s, or maybe if you're a little delayed, start in your 30s, but start making those investments. So when you're older, so when unexpected things happen, you will have made the deposits you needed to have a nice, healthy, happy life. So where should we invest? The first area to consider, if you are female and if you are in that midlife zone, and keep in mind perimenopause can start in your 30s. It's not really, perimenopause doesn't mean you're old, and most women that are in it are kind of in denial. They don't realize this, and this is irrespective of education level, although there is more and more awareness now in the public eye, and more women, I think, are realizing sooner and wanting to do something about it. But it is possible that hormone replacement therapy can actually help and may be protective of the brain. It certainly protects your metabolism, and it might be just the solution you need to make that investment in your cognitive reserve. We talked about movement and exercise, sleep hygiene. Poor sleep reduces the size of your brain. Maybe that's enough to inspire you to go to bed on time tonight. But if you have ever taken a chronotype test to understand what your sleep type is, this can be very valuable for you. Personally, I'm an early bird, and when I take those chronotype tests, it is consistent. I need to get up early, and I need to go to bed early. And when I don't, I see my days different. And this matters. And I think we're going to, we already have a lot of great research in the space, but we're going to keep learning more and more about how sleep is not as negotiable as we once thought it was. The sleep you lose, you never get back. You have permanently taken money out of your cognitive reserve. Make sure you eat for your brain. Plenty of publications, Mediterranean diet, polyphenols, omega-3s, all good choices for your brain. And supplementation for cognitive potential. I fundamentally feel as a scientist in the field who formulates nutritional products and studies physiology and how to optimize performance, that we can not only eat healthfully, but we can augment our healthful state, and we can invest in things like our cognitive reserve through appropriate targeted supplementation. Another piece that we haven't talked about is challenging your mind continuously. That lifelong path of learning, so important. Not the easy stuff. Like if I get off our webinar today and I go study cognitive longevity, well, that's very nice, Colleen. But what if I studied something different, like how to invest in, I don't know, the Indian stock market, for example? That would be a real challenge for me because I haven't done that yet. That is how you strengthen your brain. Think about it this way. We were talking about stress, and there's good stress and there's bad stress. And the good kind of stress is when we challenge ourselves to learn new things and we enjoy it. And of course, managing our stress, staying socially connected, managing our metabolic health and our heart health, all of this is important contributors to cognition and avoiding neurotoxins like alcohol. So brain supplement interest is on the rise. And actually, cognitive aging is really gaining traction across the globe. Nootropics is a word we use for substances proven to improve cognition and support healthy brain function. And we have various classifications that we can use for our nootropics, depending on what they impact. So there are various opportunities to influence our neurotransmitter levels, as well as increasing our nerve cell growth and even supporting stress resilience. And Bacco-Mind is one of those key ingredients to do that. So I'll talk about that in just a second. And of course, we can classify the cognitive function that we can impact by memory and learning, mental energy and fatigue, focus and productivity, and stress and anxiety. And so this, if you formulate products or you're interested in formulating products for your business, it's one of the key areas you need to figure out is what your audience that you're going to target wants and needs, both from the scientific literature, but also your consumer testing. So let's talk about Bacco-Mind, which is the world's first clinically tested Bacopa. And it is backed by 20 years of research. So Bacco-Mind is actually called Bacopa monnieri. It's also known as Brahmi, and it's very much a revered herb in Ayurvedic tradition. It's cultivated in the wetlands and marshy areas across India and Southeast Asia, and it is known for its nootropic and adaptogenic properties. So the Bacco-Mind team has been working on this ingredient for 20 years, and they have actually analyzed this, the Bacopa, to identify the 9 most powerful bioactives, and they actually control the growing of the Bacopa to ensure the optimal amounts of these bioactives, and they extract the Bacopa to ensure that these optimal levels remain in a ratio of 20:1. So the Bacco-Mind is actually the most potent Bacopa in terms of its bacoside composition, but it also includes some other components that we'll talk about. There are 5 clinical studies, one of which is a safety study that Bacco-Mind has sponsored. There's over 10 clinical studies on Bacopa in the published peer-reviewed literature. And Bacco-Mind is certified to sell across the globe, and you always know you get what you pay for. So this is a high-quality, controlled, patent-protected ingredient. So I mentioned it's highly bioactive. There are 9 key bioactives. 5 of which are Bacopa bioactives, and then we've got 4 additional bioactives that play key roles in cognitive health. So when we talk about BacoMind, we like to say that it adds 7 years of cognitive age to your life. So let me just defend that for a second. I'm not going to go through every clinical study today, but we'd be happy to share the clinical studies with you. So in this one clinical study, though, we actually evaluated in a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study of 98 people who were over 55 years old. We gave them 300 milligrams of BacoMind for 12 weeks. And we used something called the auditory verbal learning test. And that showed us that they had a treatment effect or improvement of 4.8 points. So like, what does that mean? So simply, we know that the normative annual learning decline is about 0.7 points per year using this same testing methodology. So from a simple calculation, then we were able to conclude that using the BacoMind for 12 weeks actually improved your cognitive longevity by 7 years. So why not eat a healthy diet, do good exercise, find ways to manage your stress, good sleep hygiene, and add BacoMind to your daily protocol. There are over 100 formulations globally that use BacoMind. There's one on the bottom left here that is just BacoMind, but you can also combine it with other ingredients. For example, B12 is commonly deficient in people that develop cognitive problems, so you want to resolve that. And that's commonly an issue because of the decrease in absorption from decrease in intrinsic factor. And it does take a while for that deficiency to develop. So it gets missed a lot. So B12, maybe magnesium is another thing that we would consider. But there's many great ways you can formulate with BacoMind that actually haven't even been done yet. So I do want to just point out, of course, it's very nice to have a way to evaluate your brain aging. So you can evaluate your stress with cortisol, which I also think is quite valuable because you might really learn how stressed you really are, depending on how you fall on your cortisol curve. And then you can also test your brain aging very simply with these memory and attention tests. So I found 2 for you here. You can scan the QR codes below and you can start taking the tests. I actually had a lot of fun with the Mind test, and it's a research study. So you're contributing to somebody's study. And I contributed like 3 times because I wanted to see if I could get smarter and younger. I was trying to get younger. Anyways, it's a nice tool to use to actually increase awareness of your own cognition or the cognition of your consumers who might be considering how they can use BacoMind. So I want to thank you for your attention, and you have a way to reach me here on the left side of your screen and how you can reach BacoMind, the BacoMind team. They're absolutely brilliant, and Natural Remedies on the right. And I'm open for questions. I don't know how I did on timing, Len, if we have enough time for questions.
You're actually right on. We do have time for a couple questions. We don't
Okay.
have too much time, but we do have a little bit. So I'm going to start, and we do encourage them. If we can't get to them, we'll certainly try to get to them later by email or whatever. So question that I have, Colleen, is you talked about 300 milligrams of the BacoMind for 12 weeks, the increase in cognitive longevity. Going to get back to that term in a second.
Yeah.
Is there a rebound effect, and has that been measured? Like, how quickly will the benefits fall off?
Oh, you mean if you stop taking it after the
Correct.
12 weeks? Oh, that's a good question, Len. To my knowledge, that has not been measured. And it's a very good question. It's just like with probiotics, where we know we have at least a month.
Yep.
We
Yep.
have like a little leeway. But since it takes a while for the ingredient to build up and work, right? So it gradually improves over time, and we get to that very significant effect at 12 weeks. I would just, from a logistical point of view, suspect it would be something similar, where you might have a decline over that same time period. Whereas when I used probiotics as an example, they're going to work a little bit quicker. So that would be my hypothesis, but we don't actually have the data to support that.
Okay. Next is really about this term cognitive longevity and the cognition category and everything associated with it, and especially for women's health, that connection is exploding and the research is deepening. Is the term cognitive longevity resonating in messaging? And is that something you can work into sort of claim support, or what has been the response in the market to that term? It would seem like it could be differentiating, but it's crowded.
Yeah, well, I think that's always the challenge. I think it's working well in terms of incorporating it with the term longevity because that it may almost makes more sense out of, the word cognition. Cognition on its own maybe is not as exciting. So I do find in terms of speaking about it, communicating it, that, it the term seems to resonate and it resonates with people from many different backgrounds. But in terms of, the kind of claims we typically can make, they're more specific around memory, attention, learning, um, executive function, they're more specific. So yeah, it's kind of a roundabout answer, but I think when we're talking about cognitive longevity, it's more of a broader communications angle. And for product, we're often getting more specific.
Totally makes sense. Okay,
Yeah,
we are at the time. Colleen,
great.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
Great presentation. Really learned a lot. And we want to thank Natural Remedies for underwriting that session. And Maggie, back to you.